Weirding Way Media.
Hello and welcome to episode 123 of the Filmumentaries Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Benning, and as usual, you're in for about an hour of wonderful behind-the-scenes chat. Yeah, episode 123. Every time I say which episode it is, I just think, wow, how did I get here? 123. Amazing. I hope you've enjoyed my recent episodes with Jim Frederick and Howard Berry. If you haven't heard them, Jim worked in movie marketing for a few decades, cutting trailers and making posters for some of the best-known films of the time. And I loved his stories about The Shawshank Redemption and Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut, and his experience of coming over to the UK and cutting those teaser trailers on the Kubrick estate. Yeah, just such a unique perspective on a job I really didn't know much about. And then most recently, episode 122, I spoke with director Howard Berry about his film, Her Name Was Moviola, in which he rebuilt a traditional edit room and enlisted the expertise of Walter Murch to recut a scene from Mike Leigh's Mr. Turner in the analog way. It's totally fascinating, and I really hope it gets a wider release soon. It's currently doing the festival circuit at the moment, but no, it's a great chat with Howard. I've known him for many, many years online. We've been in the same room a few times at different things, but it was great to finally have a chat and properly talk to him about his passion project. Before we jump into today's conversation, I just wanted to let you know that I now have a merch shop at filmumentaries.creator-spring.com where I'm selling some new stuff. I've made some new directed by Irving Kershner t-shirts and mugs, some ET sweaters and some Filmumentaries logo t-shirts and some Inside Jabber t-shirts and mugs and bags and all sorts of stuff. So please check them out. It's just another way that you can support the podcast. If you do want to support the podcast, as usual, patreon.com/Jamie Benning. For just one $12 payment, you can support the podcast for an entire year. I really do love making this podcast, and I still don't make enough money to justify the amount of work and the amount of time it takes me away from my family. So if you love listening to it, please consider supporting it. Thank you. And also a big thank you to the 113 people that already do support the podcast. Okay, in this episode, you'll hear my conversation with Vickie Sampson. Vickie is a veteran of the sound department. 1 hour cannot do her career justice. She's worked as a director, a sound designer, dialogue editor, ADR recordist, starting in 1973, and she's still working in the business today. She's worked on so many big movies and movies that you'll know, including New York, New York, Ordinary People, On Golden Pond, Romancing the Stone, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Return of the Jedi. Now you know why she's on the podcast. Tank Girl, The Fifth Element, and so many more. And we don't get a chance to talk about all of those, of course, but it is a good conversation about what her job entails and some cool little stories along the way. So here's my conversation with Vickie Sampson, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on.
Yeah, I have a funny story about Jaws because my mom, who was Kay Rose, who won the Oscar up there. But you're not using video for this, right? Just podcast?
No. But you can. Talk,
okay, there's an Oscar on my shelf behind me. But and she was best friends with Verna Fields, who was the film editor of Jaws, and she and Steven Spielberg and Verna were very close. And I used to swim in Verna's pool. She lived in Sherman Oaks. Suburb of Los Angeles. To Verna's house?
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
Wow.
I found it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Anyway, so I used to swim in her pool, and Spielberg used to bring his Springer Spaniels over to swim in the pool, too. And so one day he came and he said, "Hey, Vickie, you got to get out of the pool because we have to film an insert of Bruce the Shark for Jaws." And it's like, oh, I got to get out of the pool. you know.
That shot would have been the shot with the guy's eye hanging out in the boat, and yeah, I think they poured milk in the pool to like make it murky, and yeah, amazing. I love that.
I didn't get to stay around.
filmmaking.
Yeah, I didn't get to stay around for the shoot of that, but I saw Spielberg after a screening of Fablemans, and he was very protected, and everybody was around him, and I was like, Steven, it's Vickie Rose, Kay Rose's daughter. And he's like, of course, Vickie, I know you, You
Nice.
never know if they remember or not. And I said, remember about the Jaws thing, and you had to get me out of the pool? He goes, yeah, my Springer Spaniels, and he named them,
Wow.
And that was pretty fun that he remembered that too. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to get him for the doco, because it'd be great to have him and Joe sat on the sofa talking about just things like that, But we're here to talk about you today.
Okay. Alrighty.
Vickie, how did you begin your journey into the industry? I understand you have family that was already in the industry.
Yes, I like to say I was born in a trim bin in Hollywood. A trim bin, for those people who are in digital mode, was a metal bin that held trims of film. When you'd make a cut, you'd have to hang it up and be able to find it later. So that's just sort of an apocryphal thing. But yeah, my dad was a film editor and a director, Sherman Rose, his name was.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was a sound editor, the first woman to win an Oscar for sound editing, by the way, for the movie The River, directed by Mark Rydell, which I also worked on, but, she was the supervisor, so she got the Oscar. My dad was a graduate of MIT. He was into computers way before, like in 1937. And so he was always fascinated by technology. And I think we had the first black and white TV on the block and the first color TV on the block. And he took it all apart to see how it worked, that kind of thing. Yeah, so they got divorced when I was 5, so I was pretty little. But my dad kind of gave me my love of technology and horses and airplanes, and my mom just loved movies. She was a big movie buff. She went to Hunter College in New York, and in a film class, the professor felt like she knew more than what he was teaching, so he told her to teach the class. That's how deep her love of film and story. Wow. So I grew up with loving stories, and my mom read to me, and I imagined things in my head, and I always wanted to be a writer of stories, and so I started writing stories when I was really little and put on plays and all that kind of stuff, and I never really thought about going in the business with my mom or doing sound editing. I knew I wanted to do something in film because I just valued her very strong love of storytelling and movies. And she really should have been a producer. She kind of got stuck in sound editing as well, which was a very tough profession for a woman, especially like in the 50s. And she had to make a living because my parents were divorced, and my dad was very supportive and all, but not, she was the one who really raised me. I saw him on weekends, and we'd fly his little plane around the valley here and go to Palm Springs sometime. He had a little, 2-seater plane. And I would accompany my mom to go to, her work sometimes and play with the film cores, which are, the little round thing that keeps the film on without a reel, so it just held. I'm trying to describe it because I know people can't see it. So it's a little like 2-inch to 4-inch circle of plastic, and I would stack them up, and then I take all the sound and pull the tops out and make like towers, and of course it would topple over, and then somebody would have to wind it up. And when I was little, it's like when my mom would come home from work, her hands would be like black, and the first thing she'd do is wash them off. And it's like, what does she do that her hands get so black? Well, it's running film through a moviola, your hands get really black, which I discovered when I started. And I started helping her out on things like she and Verna Fields, who was the editor of Jaws, Verna had a cutting room in the back of her pool house. And because her husband had died and she had 2 young sons to raise, so she got kind of special dispensation to bring a moviola and a bin and a bench and all this equipment you needed back then. And so she could edit at home and be with her boys. And they had a big dog, big German Shepherd dog named Bubbles, who was a black German Shepherd who would just lay across the moviola pedals, and get hair all over the tracks and things like that. So I think one summer I helped them on a film that was directed by the son of Mattel, whose name was, of course, Ken. And his sister was Barbie. But anyway, so Ken wanted to try his hand at directing. So he made this not so great film called, through many titles, I think it ended up with The Fusty Pendant, which who knows what that even means. But he got all these really well-known, experienced people to work on. He got Verna to do the film editing. He got my mom to do the sound. He got George Brand, who was a music editor, to do the music. They dubbed it with Richard Portman, who was a very famous re-recording mixer. And so I kind of, helped them out in the summer, but, between my last year of high school. And I got bit by the film bug. It's like, oh, this is really fun. We could put all these pieces together. And,
yeah.
I had gone to the set with my mom. She worked on the Big Valley and the Rifleman series and at CBS. And I used the CBS address, 4020 Radford, as my emergency contact for her because she was a working mom. And this was in the, late 50s, 60s. And women weren't really divorced and women didn't really have careers. And her approaching working was not only from a love of films, but also of necessity, So she would go out for jobs. And she told me once that she went for a job about a submarine movie. And the producers, were interviewing her. And they said, well, you're a woman, what do you know about submarines,
Wow.
And one of the guys waiting to also be seen for an interview, he says, I'm a guy. I don't know anything about submarines either, so don't count that. Yeah, good for him. Exactly. And she was very much supported by men throughout her whole career, as far as recognizing her talents. But a few of them still had holds on women don't do this. In fact, that filtered down to me. On a couple movies with a very well-known composer who felt that women shouldn't be sound editors. What do we know about sound?
Wow.
It's we listen better than you do.
Yeah,
obviously.
well, yeah. My wife always tells me that, yeah.
But it's a thing. I think sometimes when women speak, and no offense to you or any man who's listening, they just kind of go blank. And this has happened to me more than once. I've been the only woman on the dub stage where we mix the movie, and most of it is always men. There was 3 re-recording mixers, one for dialogue effects and music. Now we do it with 2. Sometimes we only do it with 1. And, the director would be a man, the producers would be, the film editor would be every man, right? So I remember on one film, I stood up and I said, it'd be really cool if we could move that sound from the left speaker to the right speaker, just move it across the screen. And I could see them nodding their heads. It's okay. And 5 minutes goes by and a guy stands up and goes, you know what? Let's move that sound from the left to the right. I'm like, I just told you guys that 5 minutes ago. Oh, we didn't hear you.
There's a whole comedy sketch in the UK. There's a show called The Fast Show over here where that is a sketch and it runs throughout all of the series where a woman has these ideas and then all the guys take the ideas and it is a real thing. I've seen it happen. I don't know what it is.
What's it called?
It's called The Fast Show. FAST. Oh. Yeah.
Cool. I don't know.
It's from years ago, but there's a well-known scene in that or a sketch in that kind of runs throughout.
Oh, isn't that funny? That's funny.
You spoke about the sort of relationship that your mum had with Verna Fields. How important is that relationship between a sound editor and a picture editor in your experience?
It's the most crucial because, the film editor, especially today, I'll say in the past, we had, professional film editors that had a professional film assistant who would prepare everything to give to us because the film editor has to prepare all the tracks for us to receive them and then work on them. I don't know what people in your podcast know about the process of sound editing. If you want me to explain it real
absolutely.
quick.
Yeah, this is partly why I do the podcast as well myself. I know a little bit, but I'm always willing to learn more.
So, on the set, they're recording the sound as well as the picture. Sometimes they have a boom guy who will move the mic from actor to actor. Sometimes they're not paying attention, or an actor will improvise, and so part of the words might be off mic, which is the worst thing that can happen to a film, especially student films, because, I've been teaching post-production since like 92, where I started at UCLA, because I wanted to pass along not only my experience, but also the teachings of my mom and why I have the ethics in sound that I do. And I could see even back then that it was deteriorating from lack of experience or just bad teaching. You get teachers who learn Pro Tools and then they teach that to the students. And it's not about the machinery. It's about, the brain and what happens. You have to think about. I write a bi-monthly, I don't know, a quarterly column in our MPSE, which is Motion Picture Sound Editors Group magazine, called Dialogue Detective, because you have to discover things. You have to find out, like, what is the problem? What are the options to fix it, and how to fix it the best and most efficient way. So on the set, they're recording the sound. The sound has to be sunk to the picture, which is a whole nother thing. I mean, nowadays we have smart slates and, slaved sound devices and different recording techniques. But the principles are all the same. No matter how much the technology changes, the principles of how to set it up properly. So once the film is shot, it goes to the film assistant, who then syncs up the dailies. Mm-hmm. So the film editor can have an orderly way to find the scenes, because we might shoot your angle today because the camera is in front of you, and then tomorrow we may shoot from a different angle, and all of that has to sound like it's consistently shot on the same day, even if it's not. So once the film editor puts all the pieces together, let's say, in the order they want them with the director, then they have to create a turnover to sound. And what that involves nowadays is, like, if you're editing an Avid or Premiere or DaVinci, we have to receive what's called an AAF, or it used to be called an OMF, AAF, which is, I don't know, audio, but I don't even know what it stands for, actually.
You know what it means, though. Yeah.
And so what it is it's a translation. It's a file that's a translation of the film editor's session. So they might have 10 tracks of dialogue and 5 tracks of temp music and 6 tracks of sound effects they've thrown in for fun. And then when I open it in a Pro Tools, which is the digital audio workstation that most people use nowadays, it opens up as a session that I can then edit. And so if let's say you have a lav mic and a boom mic on each actor, there's a wonderful article by Simon Hayes, who did the sound recording on Wicked, and he has a whole column, and it's amazing what they did. They did live recordings while Cynthia Erivo was flying around. They had live mics, and they had a thing called silent wind, so they could just shoot the wind right at the cape to make it move and not hit the microphones. I mean, when you see you should look him up, Simon Hayes.
Yeah.
I think he's English as well. Anyway, oops, I went off on a track. I do that a lot. So, okay, so if they have a lav and a boom on an actor, a lot of times inexperienced people will just put a combine track for the film editor to cut with, because they got to do it fast, has to get done fast. Or somebody else can sync it up later. It's like, no, that somebody is me, and I don't have access to time codes in Pro Tools as far as syncing up. I have to do it by eye, So if the mics aren't sunk up right, I have a mess of a session. So then my creative time that they're supposedly paying for is going out the window while I'm, putting in, because I'll say to them, did you guys have a lav and a boom? I always have a lot of questions to ask the director if somebody says, "Oh, can you do the sound on my short film? It's only 4 minutes." It's like, well, your 4-minute film is going to take me about a week to do, depending on these things. Like, so I'll listen to what they send me, and I'll say, "Did you have a lav and a boom?" Yeah. I said, well, "I don't see them in your session that you turned over to me. They're not there." "Oh, well, we'll send you the raw files." It's like, no. It's a lot easier for you to go back and sync it up. But this is the thing. It's like all these standards of what used to be a professional way of turning over to sound. Now everybody with an iPhone, can make a movie. And,
so the discipline has gone in many ways. So because I would imagine that, when you're receiving all of that material, you're going to want, the script, the reports, the whoever's mixing on set, you want their notes, you want any details about wild tracks they've recorded, the list of characters, all of that stuff has got to be there, because I mean you're not going to see the wood for the trees at this point if that's not there.
Right, exactly. And a lot of independent productions, I'll say, "Oh, do you have a lined script," which is what the script supervisor does on the set, and it explains all the different takes of each scene and what camera lens was used and what time it was shot, and any kind of sound notes like, "Oh, there's an airplane that flew by during our, Western section. Not my fault," or "generator was left on," different notes like that really help us. And really, in all these independent things I've been doing for the last 10 years, I have not hardly ever seen a line script.
Right.
So, because nobody has the budget for it, these independent films. But professional films, yes, they have to have a line. I mean, when I worked on Pirates of the Caribbean, we had 2 notebooks that were 8 inches thick. That was the line script. I mean, and when you do a scene, like let's say it's scene 1, and take 1 is the master, and then 1 apple, take 1 is a different angle. We went through and then when you get through A to Z, you start going A, B, A, C, A. we were down to A, B, C numbers. There was that many takes, and everybody was mic'd. So they had 8 actors in a scene. There was 8 lav mics. And, a film editor doesn't want to drag all of that in their session. It would make it massive. So it has to be really properly set up to access those. When we get it back, it's here's the first take, which is usually a combine, and then there's 8 lavs and a left boom, a right boom, it's incredible amount of stuff.
And do you see picture at this point as well? Have you got a low res kind of proxy running there as well? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, on professional films, they're never locked till they get released, pretty much. And so along the way, imagine, I'm editing something that has maybe 50 to 60 tracks of sound, and they make even a 1-frame change. I have to go through and change. It was worse on film days, of course, because you could only put 2 tracks at a time in your little synchronizer. But now with, Pro Tools, we have, hundreds of tracks we can do.
I remember those synchronizers with the little rocker kind of. Because I used to work for a company called London Editing Machines that still had all that stuff.
Oh, nice.
In the early 2000s. But you said when a film is released, was it Ben Burt says films escape, doesn't he?
Yes, films aren't released, they escape. Yes. I used to show that section to my my classes. Yeah, that was great. But so there's a lot of practical, technical things that you have to deal with. So I have a list of questions I send out to directors about, what to look for, what to do, what to send me. Yes, I want access to all I don't want just handles on the clips that come to me, because they can designate that in their export. It's an export option. It's no, I want the whole take, because I want to be able to pull out lots of stuff, because I'm looking for clean fill, which is the sound between words. Yeah. So, which is like gold. When I worked on the Sex and the City movies, they talk all the time. There's no pauses in any of their dialogue. So, and the reason for having good fill, and that's part of production dialogue editing, or we just kind of name it dialogue editing, it's production sound that's recorded on the set. We have to smooth it out. So let's say I'm shooting you today and you have a ocean behind you or traffic. I shoot the other angle of the other person and they're shot on a different day. It has different traffic. I have to protect the voice most of all. So like in a scene with people in the background, like a restaurant, those extras are instructed not to talk because they don't want to mess up the main dialogue. If actors overlap, that could sometimes be a problem because somebody's on mic, somebody's off mic, especially like in a master shot, everybody can overlap because it's all getting recorded. But in coverage, your close up, your medium, her medium shot, whatever, when you put those together, then you can hear the change of ambience in the background behind the words. So we're really looking for a good, signal to noise ratio, that your voice is above the noise floor. And if somebody's, talking way down low like this, they're not projecting enough, it's really, you can't make somebody sound on mic. There hasn't been a plug-in that I know of that can take off mic dialogue and make it sound on mic. So if there's problems like that, then we have to ADR it or loop it, automated dialogue recording, where you have to bring in the actor back and a lot of people do, like Donald Sutherland. He purposely speaks low because he wants to come in and redo it on the ADR stage.
Oh, really? What sort of almost like refine the performance in a way? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If people use it that way, like when I worked on Speed, the movie, not the drug. The director's choice was to film everything on a moving bus. And of course, the conceit of the film is the bus has to stay at 60 miles an hour. It blows up, right? But they're only driving from like second to third gear, and you can hear all the gear changes, so it kind of destroys the believability of the action. So, and he was told, well, you're probably going to have to bring in all the actors to loop them. And he's like, oh, okay, that's all right. I mean, he had been a cinematographer. He didn't really care too much about the sound issues, but that was my job. I was the ADR supervisor, and we recorded everything of all the actors, even the background people on the bus. We had to bring them into the record studio, and Keanu was working on Johnny Mnemonic at the time, and up in Canada. So every Friday, the director, his assistant, and I would fly up to Canada and work with Keanu on Saturdays and Sundays for 3 weeks. By the third week, poor guy, he was like picking up chairs and throwing them through the wall.
Yeah, I bet.
Because it's it's very frustrating. But he was very dedicated to it because he knew it had to be done, So if the director is behind the ADR recording, then the actors will follow suit, I mean, I've had a few obstinate directors who hated ADR. It's like, let's try to use it for what it is. And I do my homework. I don't just willy-nilly program lots of ADR. I thoroughly investigate alternate takes because, if you're on, 35's Charlie take 7, I know that there's 6 other takes that I could listen to that I might be able to, pull out a word or two or something. And I always try to match performance. There's nothing worse than having a film editor, talking about the film editor relationship. There's nothing worse than having the film editor distrust your judgment. I worked with a guy, I think it was on the movie 15 Minutes with De Niro, and he was very wary of like changes to his tracks. Like, don't cut any alternates. I said, how about I'll cut them with the performance in mind, and I'll bring them to you and you can listen to them. And he's like, okay. And after the first couple ones, he's like, wow, that you're amazing. Yes, okay. I trust you. But there are other people who just, don't even change a word of what I've done. But I said, but there's a big noise behind it. Don't you want it to? And so I always bring this up to the directors and the film editors. It's like, what's worse? You're running your movie in a theater with an audience and they don't understand a line of dialogue. So they stop and turn to their friend and they go, what'd he say? I said, then you've lost them for like 5 to 7 seconds and they're frustrated because they didn't hear it. And isn't it better for somebody to hear it, than to be disrupted in sustaining the disability, not disability,
the disbelief,
you're sustaining the disbelief. So, and I said, look, I always have the production. I will make sure the production is as good as I can make it, but we have the ADR as an option,
Do you find, sorry,
no,
do you
ahead.
find that some directors kind of fall in love with or editors fall in love with their kind of temp mix and are difficult to break out of that?
Totally. We call it temp love. Temp love. And it happens a lot with music. Like you'll just throw on a piece of music.
Yes.
And then that becomes wedded to the images that you're watching. And then that becomes like the Bible. A great example of that is when my mom and I were working on Ordinary People. And the assistant editor just threw in like Pachelbel Canon and D music to have something behind. The score was supposed to be written by Marvin Hamlish, but Redford fell in love with the temp music so much that he just like put in a few of Hamlish's music as tokens of like, okay, we're paying you $500,000 here. But yeah, it happens a lot. So I just finished a little short film for somebody and sent it to her yesterday. And I said, please be open because you're going to hear sounds you haven't heard before. And even for me, because I also direct now, I've been directing short films and stuff. So I know on both sides of the fence. It's kind of funny when I have my director hat on, my sound hat just goes out the window. And I tell people, get wild tracks, get ambiences, get things that you are indigenous to your movie while you're there. And but I hire good people and they look out for me. But there's so many things I want to tell you. Like a great thing that I learned from Mark Rydell was he'll always say, and action. So he'll put this
he's giving you that
really
space,
great pause. It's like, oh, I can use that as fill because wild tracks don't cut it. I tell people don't bother getting room tones unless it's something unusual because number one, the set is very busy. They don't want to wait even 20 seconds to get your room fill. And somebody's always making noise, and it's never the same as what you get from the actual scene itself. So those pauses of and, he does it before and an action and cut. So that there's that sound with all the people in the room at the same time matches. Whereas a wild track never usually matches. I get wild tracks of to give you a really good example, on the movie my mom won her Oscar for, which was called The River, a Mark Rydell directed film. He cares about the sound so much that he sent her to Tennessee with a separate recordist so that they could compile a library of sounds indigenous for the film. Wow. So like they went to the smelting plant and they recorded all the equipment in the smelting plant. They recorded the tractors and the farm equipment and the cicadas in the cornfields and the machinery and the animals. So she had like a library of sounds that were fresh and new, which is always good, and consistent with the film, and could slot them right in. So she was able to. Is that
rare to have a director, bring sound on that early in a movie still today?
It's budget. Because he couldn't ask the production mixer who's working 6 days a week on location, to use his seventh day to go record, cicadas in the cornfield, right?
Yeah.
So he knew it would be important for the movie, and it's more energy and time and money efficient to think about sound ahead of time. And in fact, in British movies, I mean, this is what was told to me. I don't know if it stays true, that a sound consultant is brought on before they shoot and goes over the script and makes suggestions about what to record, which I think is a fabulous idea. And Randy Tom, who's a very famous sound editor, works for
Randy.
Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
He does that. He will do that, and I've offered to do that too, but no one's taken me up on it as far as consulting. So it's really about the budget, if they have a budget to bring on another sound person. I mean, it saves so much time and money. I can't even tell you, like, I'm Looking for Mr. Goodbar. That was a movie my mom and I did, directed by Richard Brooks. He wanted, there's a scene where Richard Gere dances around the kitchen in his little tighty whities, and he has like a fluorescent knife, a switchblade, and he's dancing around, he's beating on pots and pans and all this stuff. And Brooks wanted him to have the music playing while he did this, so he'd have the energy of the music. I guess he didn't think about earbuds at that point, but and so then immediately after they did the film take, he says, "Okay, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to turn off the music." And darn it, if his timing, because it was in his muscle memory, because he'd just done it,
He'd just done it, yeah.
And
yeah.
my mom just had to make a few adjustments in this wild track of him just dancing around, beating on the pots and pans, and and it worked perfectly. I mean, to
Right.
Foley a scene, so Foley is re-record, creating sync sound effects to the picture. To do Foley for that would have taken probably half a day. And here she got a wild track that she could just adjust a little bit here and there and have it just slide right in, and it's the same ambience in the room. I mean, they've done this a lot of, like Shawshank Redemption. I think they did Foley on a live set. Like they kept the sets up with the the wood and the they had the whole sets to make Foley with. And John Rush, who's like the premier Foley walker in the world, who just retired, I think he did it, and they just had a little monitor, and they would look at the monitor and walk along, and they had a guy with a boom, following them. And it's just because it's all about believability. If you're taken out of the movie by anything, continuity, a flubbed line, something out of sync, getting back to speed. I mean, we worked really hard on that, and that was before digital. So everything had to be, I could only cut a quarter frame out. There's no way to do anything less than a quarter frame in film because it's
blade it out, kind of.
Yeah, four sprockets to a frame. Or to adjust it. Now we have time compression expansion. We could like stretch words and shrink words, and it doesn't affect the pitch of the words. And the director told me afterwards, he says, we got a better performance from the ADR than we had in the original. And I show that to my classes. I'll show them the original production with all the wind and engine noise, and then I show them the finished scene with the balance, because their voices were way below the noise floor. So even in the intimate scenes, you couldn't enjoy it. You couldn't get lost in it because you're just bombarded by noise. So that's how we like to protect things. And like my mom, she taught me to listen for little clicks and pop. We call it, non-diegetic sound. It's sound that doesn't go with the image. So, things happen on a set. Somebody drops a wrench off stage, and there's the director, who is it? Michael Mann. Well, Christopher Nolan does this too. They don't want to clean out like sounds because, they're there. It's like, this isn't a documentary. We don't have to keep the sound of the wrench in there just because it happened to get recorded, And my mom always taught me that those are things that subconsciously take you out of the movie. Like if you hear a lip click or a pop or a snap or something that doesn't belong there. And this is where fill comes in. So you take that little piece out, and you have to fill it with the same ambience that's going on in that scene. So if you have, space between words, you can just snip out or copy a little piece of that and paste it right over the click, and now it's smooth. Because anytime you notice a difference is where you're taken out of the movie, and you're reminded that, you're watching a movie. You want it to just be smooth. So
I don't think people really.
No, they don't.
They don't see the value of sound. I mean, I always sort of describe, like in the era of pirate VHS videos, you could watch one if it had a bad picture and good sound, but you couldn't watch one if it had a good picture and bad sound. You would just throw it in the trash.
Right. And, with student films, the biggest giveaway is the sound. Like, they can study the, composition and the color, temperature, and the lighting and all this stuff. But if they have bad sound, it just sucks. I mean, even people doing their fundraising campaigns, it's like, okay, you're going to shoot it with your iPhone, put a mic on them, because your iPhone is still going to give you air and room, and it makes you look, you're asking people to make your professional film, and yet the way you're asking is unprofessional.
Yeah.
So I try to get students to think of that. And really, it's just a matter of them opening up their ears and giving the sound editor a chance to do it right, because you're sitting in the editing room for months. You're on the set for a day, but you're sitting in the editing room for a month. and trying to, make it sound good. And then, of course, the whole point is like everything is singular until you start adding sounds. Like you want to be able to add sounds. It's a lot harder to take them away if they're not right.
Yeah.
And we do have a lot of, people think, oh, well, we have plugins for that. You can take out, I use VX Clarity Pro all the time to take out just a roar or rain or, things that I don't want there. And it's pretty darn good. It keeps the voice very clear, but it takes out the annoying background. But you still have to smooth all of those out. Yeah. Because you can't, and you can do it by overlapping backgrounds when you're editing. You can, go up to the end of the word and overlap the ambience with the incoming word. You can hide the ambient change under the outgoing word and the incoming word, if that makes sense. So, and then once you get done with all that, then you can start thinking about sound design and, backgrounds, and because dialogue is always going to come out of the center channel. Dialogue and Foley usually comes out of the center channel. And you go Foley, but people walk from left to right. But yeah, and then the camera changes angles. So suddenly you're going to be more aware of the person going left to right, and then all of a sudden right to left, Foley-wise, it wouldn't make sense. So Foley and dialogue usually come out of the center unless you have extra supportive things going on or you want to do something fun. Yeah. But stereo backgrounds is what you need, or whatever, if you're doing a 5.1, you want the background, because I've talked to directors too, and they go, what do I need backgrounds for? I said, well, because your dialogue is going to come out of the center, and you have no sound supporting it in the theater, to put people in that environment. Like even if it's just air, just stereo air. Or wind or rain, or you're on a submarine or something.
Yeah, some ambience of some kind. And when you work on a film like, I know you worked on Return of the Jedi, back in 82, 83, whenever that was. Did you ever? You talked about using the sounds like at the start of the dialogue or the end, coming out at the end of the dialogue. Do you have any other tricks that you used on a big film like that where you could sort of hide things under the music or the sound effects, in terms of dialogue?
Well, a lot of times we don't even know where the music's going to be. Right. So it's really good to have a temp score, because then at least we know, oh, this is going to be heavily covered by music. But then in the off chance that they decide, oh, we don't want any music there, let's just go with sound effects. And then you go, oh, well, I didn't cut any, You told me not to cut it. Usually we have what's called a spotting session, which is, haven't done one of those in a while either. I don't know if they've gone by the wayside for professional big movie films, but we used to sit in a theater and run the film with the director, the film editor, the composer, whoever else wanted to be the re-recording mixer, and we would discuss, oh yeah, this scene's going to be really driven by music, or this one's going to be dialogue heavy, and then we would go and do our respective chores on the film. So and that was a great way to know kind of what everybody's doing. Temp effects are good because it's really hard to imagine sound that isn't there, even for sound professionals, and sometimes directors will say, well, I want to make this deadline, so I'll just submit what I have. And it's like, believe me, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Like, you can't turn in your halfway edited film and expect people to fill in the blanks, So when I worked on Evan Almighty, we actually gave the film editor some sounds of animals that aren't there yet because they're all CGI. What's his face? Steve Carell.
Oh, yeah, Steve Carell.
He didn't really want to work with any live animals. Like, he was afraid of them. So almost all the animals are digital. So we sent him a library of sounds for potential animals, and the film editor put those in. And darn, if we changed one of those, the director got very upset. He's like, well, I like that dog bark. It's like, yeah, but it's like the traditional, woof, 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 that's in every movie. And he's like, but I like it. It's like, okay, you can have that one. So we try to give the film editor certain sound effects that he or she can put into the film ahead of time, so they just stay there. Even when I directed a short film in 2016 called Shelby's Vacation. It was a 35-minute short film, so it's not short compared to what today's are. But and even when I tried to change a line of dialogue in ADR, I was like, wait. It like made my hackles go up because it's like, that's not how it sounds. It's like I tell people it's like you have a favorite music group, right? Like Fleetwood Mac, let's say, and you've listened to their album over and over. You know every nuance, you know every note, and then you go hear them live, and you're like, they're not doing it right. That's not the way it goes. It's like, how dare they? So we do get like wedded to certain things, and that's why I tell people, just try to be open. Everything's changeable. Just listen to it once or twice or 5 times and see if it works for your story, because that's the thing I always go for, is the story. I don't put sound effects in for my sake. Nobody goes to hear movies I work on for the sound effects. Of course, I'm not known as a sound effects person. I'm known more for dialogue and ADR. But like on Jedi, my job on that was supervising all the London ADR. Right. So I was there for 2 weeks at Lionel Strutt's studio. I think it was across from Hyde Park or Green Park. I forget which one it is now, but it was an old cow barn. It had the arches, and they would lead the cows, in the old days, across the street down into the barn, and they turned that into an ADR stage. I always love that. And every day at 4, we break for tea. And marmite, marmite sandwiches, or marmite. How do you say it?
Marmite, yeah.
Yes, I love that stuff. Anyway, so on Jedi, there's a funny story about the film getting stolen out of my car the night before I was supposed to go, but that's for another time.
Right.
Yeah, I show up and George Lucas already knew about the stolen film, and he's like, "What are you gonna do?" But that's the only Lucasfilm I've worked on. But I don't know if that had anything to do with it.
Right. But you were doing the ADR on that?
Yeah, did all the English ADR in
London.
Right,
I see.
And so there was a close-up of a guy, stormtrooper guy, a medium close-up, and he's in the big barn. And I would notice that, people usually inhale before they talk. When you inhale, your shoulders rise a little bit. In production sound, you might hear a wisp of it, but you don't really connect it to the words because it's very, indigenous to the scene, right? When you ADR it and all you're hearing is this dark ADR that's clean and doesn't have background sound behind it, suddenly that breath looks like it's missing. And then you can tell that it's ADR. So back in the day, the machines didn't go into record until after the imaginary 4th beep. So we'd get beep, 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 talk. So, and it would go into record after that 3rd beep. So if the actor was inhaling to say the line where the imaginary 4th beep would be, it would be obliterated by the beeps that are on the speakers. Yeah. So I would furiously make notes about where did he have a breath in that one, because I knew I would have to steal a breath. Finally, I said, could we just ADR his inhale? And I had 3 sets of eyes just whip their heads around and what are you talking about? And I said, trust me, you'll thank me later because it's important to have his inhale as part of his words. And it's really hard to program for the inhale because you get beep, beep, beep. Okay, Frank, go over there, actors just couldn't do that. And so nowadays we can put the beeps only in their headphones, and then I can use, and it goes into way record because it's in Pro Tools, so I can use, a lot of but back then, no. So they humor me and do the inhales, and I get a call from the dub stage a couple weeks later when they were mixing, and they're like, nobody can believe that line was ADR'd because of that breath. It's yes, that's what I wanted to accomplish. So it's all about, suspending your disbelief that you're watching a film and having nothing distract you from it. Even a sound effect could be distracting. I mean, in a horror film, you have sound effects distracting you all the time because that's what they're meant to do. They want to scare you and stuff. So you have these stingers that come out at you. But in a dialogue-driven film, you want to try to make it as smooth and easy on the ears as possible and still hear the dialogue. Yeah.
Do you still like hear these things when you go to see movies? Do you still think, oh, that was a moment that could have been sweetened a bit more? Because I think I've always had a pretty good ear for sound. I had a little tape recorder as a very young kid that my granddad gave me, and I would record my parents talking and things off the TV. And I've I work in live TV as well, and I'm listening out for things. And I do notice things. I think actually a big example of that for me is in Jaws. Actually, Richard Dreyfuss is going through what's left of Chrissy, the first victim of the shark, and there's a line inserted in there. He says something like, "And this is what happens," and it's clearly lifted from another scene because the ambience sounds different. You don't see him say it. It's sort of an over-the-shoulder shot, but it sounds different to everything else. Do you notice things like that as you're watching modern movies as well?
I will notice glaring things because, I want to get lost in the movie as much as anybody. And so, people ask me that a lot. Like, how can you even enjoy a movie? I said, well, because I want to get lost in it. And it's only if something's really sticking out to me, like what you just said about Jaws. Yeah, I would notice that. And, and also when I go to work on a film, I want to watch the whole thing. I mean, we used to watch it in a theater with the director, but because again, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And so I want to get the impression of what the movie is about, even at its base level. Like I don't sit there and go, okay, well, I'm going to have Foley for that. And that's going to, no, I just want to get lost in the story. And then I could go back and kind of frame, we call it, I don't know if this is allowed, but frame fucking.
We say the same thing. I'm in live TV editing, so we say exactly the same thing.
Okay. Yeah. So, later I will go back, but I'll still have that first impression of, like, I might say, oh, I'd really like to do this to that scene. It'll just kind of sit there in my mind. And then when I go back to actually start working on it reel by reel, foot by foot, minute by minute, then I can take it apart. It's like hyper focus, micro focus, and then it's like zooming in. I zoom into the problem, but then I zoom back out again to see, okay, is it worth it to ADR this, or is the production, going to work? Can people still hear it the first time through, so they don't turn to their friend and say, "What do you say?" So and it's always changing. So that's the thing. Like, when I work on independent films, I say I want a locked picture, meaning you cannot make more changes because it's too time-consuming for me to keep up with you. So just send me the locked picture when you're ready, and then we can, go from there. And all those other questions that I like to ask, like, did they have a lav and boom? Did it get put into the system? Do I have access to it? And they'd be surprised. I mean, some people, they would have just edited with the combine track and not known there was anything better. Because I say, I can't believe that this would be your recording. And then I find the lav and it's nice and clean,
Yeah,
It's like,
right.
oh.
Yeah.
So, I try to go with the feeling of the movie too, and in choosing sound effects. Like this little short film, I sort of don't even know what it's about. It's sort of like an art film. And the director said, well, just, put in he's in the city and he sees a coyote on a tennis court. So I went from like the contrast of helicopters, city sounds, cityscapes to, she wanted to put in like Amazon jungle. I don't know what that has to do with a coyote, but hey, I did it for her. I sent it to her and see what she says. But, so I try to do contrasts to things so that you do make a difference in how sometimes you want a big contrast and sometimes you want subtle contrast. So it really, like my mom used to say, the story dictates what you do to it. So if you're doing a comedy, like she did a Carl Reiner film called Where's Papa? Do you know that film?
I know of it. I don't think I've ever seen
Yeah.
it though. Yeah.
George Segal and Ruth Gordon. It's an amazing film, way, way, way ahead of its time. And it was before I got in the industry. I think I was like 15, and I went to the dub stage, and they had to like shield my eyes because certain scenes were a little raunchy, and I couldn't even buy the book. Like the book was R-rated, you know. But in that film, you know, it's kind of a very black comedy, and you know, the George Segal was a lawyer in a very rundown office, so much so that my mom put a little creak in the floor. Every time he walked on to the other side of the room, she put a floor creak in a spot, you know, and nobody's going to say, oh, wow, that floor creak was great.
Yeah.
And Carl Reiner didn't say, oh, put a floor creak in there. That was from her thinking about the story and what could be added to make it even funnier, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's really the art of it. And, you know, that's why cutting sound effects is so much harder than editing production dialogue. Production dialogue's a real puzzle piece. Like you figure out all these there's all these problems, clicks and pops and uneven ambiances and all this stuff, but it's there, it's presented to you, and then I just find a way to fix it, you know? Whereas sound effects, it's like, well, what kind of bird do I want? What kind of rain? What kind of sound do I want when he puts his hands on a chain link fence, you know? Like in reality, would it even make a sound? And why we enhance it with I once did a funny workshop for some inner city kids, and a friend of mine was doing an after school program for these inner city kids, and I said to her, tell them to bring something that makes, you know, noise, like something in there, because it was going to be kind of a live little Foley session. And they all brought mostly empty spray paint cans. So I was telling them like how in movies we tend to make things bigger than life. And I said, like gunshots, like most people don't really know what gunshots sound like. And all these kids just kind of just sat back in their chair and like crossed their arms and said, lady, you're talking to the wrong people. You know, because a real life gunshot just sounds like a pop. But if we put that in a movie, you know, people would like not accept that. So
yeah.
But
being a dialogue editor, though, you must have quite a sort of weirdly intimate relationship with these actors that you're listening to all day long, because you're hearing every little nuance of their voice in your headset or in, you know, with your great sound setup there. Are there any particular actors that you really love listening to over and over?
Oh, that's funny. Well, see, that's why I like ADR, because I'm actually on the stage with them live in person.
That's
and
true.
Working with them as an editor. I mean, there's
let's adapt the question. And is there somebody that you think is, you know, particularly gifted at ADR that you've worked with a number of times?
Oh goodness. Yeah. I mean, there's so many that are gifted and so many that aren't. But like Meryl Streep is great. She's very professional, and you know, of course. And I worked with Sigourney Weaver and Robert De Niro. I mean, all of them. Mostly who they know the reason for it. Some people just come in and say, well, why are we looping this? And if it's a performance issue, I can't say, wow, the director thought your performance sucked. I can't say it, so I have to say, oh, there's like a tone, you don't hear it on these tracks because these aren't the real track. You know, I have to lie to them, which I don't like to do. And I always tell them,
we need to add diplomat to your job title then as well.
Definitely. Yeah, being an ADR supervisor is a really hard position to be in, especially if the director's combative. I was working on a film that starred Chris Rock years ago, and the director, you can look him up, but so Chris Rock said a line of dialogue, and behind it was out, they were shooting in Central Park or something. Behind it, somebody went whoop like that. So it was right under his words, and I did my due diligence. I looked for every outtake. It was an improvised line. It didn't happen anywhere else. So I put it on, you know, the ADR sheet, and all it was the words were, Lion King, I can't do that, because he was a ticket scalper. Those were his words, like 5 words, right? Lion King, I can't do that. All right, 6 words. And we get to the ADR stage, and Chris Rock is there, and the director's there, and he picks up the sheet and waves it in my face. He goes, why are we looping this line? You're going to waste this actor's time. And like yelling, screaming at me. And I said, gosh, we could have recorded 5 takes in the time it took you to yell at me. But, you know, and I told him the reason why, you know, because it had a sound under it. And he goes, oh, so we're going to waste this actor's time, loop this line, and then you're going to put loop group people behind it. And I said, yes, but loop group people, we can adjust the balances of the levels. This married thing to his words, I can't unmarry it, basically. So he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do those lines. And we get to the dub stage, and the mixer turns to me, goes, there's a word under this, like, I can't get it out. And he said, why didn't you loop this? It's like, And of course you can't say, oh, the director told me not to and yelled at me and made me cry. You can't.
Wow.
But what I never got back to saying how I got in the business was just gotten bit by that bug. And then I was just about to go off to college and do writing and stuff like that. And my mom got a call to do a film, and they were looking for an apprentice editor, and she did not believe in nepotism, although of course the opportunity was there. So the film editor, Don Camburn, who was a really great editor, and he was president of the Editors Guild for many years, he said, well, let me look at the availability list. And he goes through the list, and he's like, no, they're all drunks. Okay, Vickie can come on, because you had to go through the list first before you could hire somebody new. So I got on as an apprentice editor when I was 20 on a film called Cinderella Liberty that Mark Rydell directed. And Mark would call my mom before he even knew who the actors were. Like he said, hey, I got a movie coming up here, make sure you're available. And
you want to have your team, don't you? You want to have the people you can trust around you throughout, and those early stages, it must be really important to have friends by your side.
Well, and it's people develop relationships. Like Spielberg and Richard Anderson met at USC, and so Richard Anderson did the sound on a couple of Stevens films. And I just saw Wicked, which was great, by the way. And John Chu had met his DP Alice Brooks at USC when they were studying together, and she worked on all his films up to this, and including Wicked. So people, you want to work with people and trust, because you develop a kind of shorthand, and it's nice. I like loyalty in those relationships, and film editors too. I mean, the film editor had requested me specifically for Speed, because the sound supervisor, who ended up winning an Oscar and didn't even thank me on the broadcast, and the Academy had gone to him. I don't know if you want to include this in your thing, but the Academy had gone to him and said, you should really add Vickie's name as co-supervisor, because she did a phenomenal job. Don't you agree? And he's like, yes, but I get single credit. Oh. And I mean, what is it to put a person's name on? And then it wins the Oscar for best sound. So
navigating egos is a time wasting. It wastes so much time in our industries. It's just, I find it so frustrating. I was talking to somebody the other day who was John Bell, his name was. He was a designer. I worked on a lot of Spielberg and ILM stuff. And he was saying that, when you get ego out of the way, you can just get stuff done. Like you've all got a common aim. You're not trying to navigate all the time and second guess each other. Just get it out of the way. And that's when real creativity can happen.
Well, it was so encouraging to hear the dialogue from John Chu and Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande and Alice Brooks and the costumer after the screening of Wicked, because you could tell they're just a very collaborative team who cared about the movie, who cared about each other. And it's so much better than the model of like, I'm the dictator of this film and you'll do what I say, or off with your head kind of thing. And I've worked for those kind of directors too, and it's awful, but you just tolerate. It's sort of like the election. You just tolerate it till you can elect somebody new. But so but so I that's how I got in, and then a lot of people get in from their parents, but they don't stay.
You still have to
because
prove
they're not
yourself,
good.
though.
Yes. So I mean, I became the ADR supervisor on New York, like 4 years after I started, being an apprentice. And I remember Liza Minnelli, we were looping her that day, and I was trying to make a connection, like, hey, you worked with your mom, I work with my mom, and she gives me $5 and says, go get me some beer. I said, I'm the ADR supervisor, I'm not the PA, or something like that. But yeah. But it's funny you said about being attuned to voices. Like, I'll be here in my little office and my wife is, watching TV, and I'll just out of the corner of my ear hear a voice I recognize. I go, oh, that's so-and-so, or I notice the Wilhelm scream.
Yes,
you guys probably know about that.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
notice that. It's in a Pringles commercial, but it's like my ear just goes right to it. But
yeah. I love that they found the original recording session of that where you can hear the guy being directed and he's like, no, you're being attacked by an alligator. It's got to be a scream.
Right. Yeah, that's a funny tidbit.
I love talking to you though, Vickie. I feel like there's so much more that we can talk about.
I told you that.
You did.
I could do this for 4 hours.
So what do you think that, are the kind of combination of skills that you have that have enabled you to work for so many decades through the analog period, through the into the digital period, and now into perhaps even a new period with AI? What have you got, Vickie, that has kept you going so long in the industry?
I think it's my love of story. Like, I want to be able to enhance a good story with the use of intelligent sound editing and design concepts and contributions to the story through sound. I mean, I'd rather do them from writing and directing now than sound, but I still do sound for people. I think, and I love teaching new filmmakers about the power of sound and try to get them early, because you could make a bad movie be better by good sound.
Yeah.
It's not going to save the movie, and I don't like horror films. I know a lot of people start with horror films, but I don't like putting that kind of energy out in the world. I don't like their message. So I like good things, but you're trying to get people to understand the power of sound and getting it, right the first time. Like, don't let your brother Bob hold the boom mic, or say, oh, I could record it on my da-da-da. It's like, I even pay for people to record sound on my films. I don't get people for free. Because when you pay somebody, they're obligated to you to do a good job. And I want to honor their talents. And I can't pay what, the big studios pay, but I pay something that makes their time worth it, valuable, and just thinking about the story. So I have a great document which I can send you called, it's basically a bunch of people, me included, who wrote up a thing of like, it's called A Letter from Your Sound Department. And it's just about, making sure things on set don't add more sound. Like, if you're only seeing people in a medium close-up, why do we have to hear their feet? Feet could be added later. You don't want things cluttering up the dialogue, because that's where the story is. And if you get good recorded dialogue with a good signal, then that's where your story comes from, is the dialogue. If people can't hear it. I mean, look at the movie with Bane. The Batman and
movie.
Yeah. Oh, horrible. He does not care about sound at all. And you don't want to frustrate people. People want to enjoy your film. You know, I heard Robert Altman say one time, like, oh, I don't care if they understood the dialogue. Let them go pay for it and see it again. It's like, no, that's not how it works.
No.
And he was the master of like multi-track recording,
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so did I answer your question? I don't know.
You did. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, but it was really lovely to talk to you, and maybe we'll get another chance to talk at length with some more of your experiences, because I just know there's so much more in there, Vickie. It feels like an hour doesn't do any justice whatsoever to your amazing
I know.
career.
People keep saying, oh, you should write a book. It's like, yeah, but who cares? But I don't know. I think about it. I do love telling the stories if they're educational, like, make it count, like make the sound count. And even George Lucas feels that it's 51% of the movie going experience.
Well, I recently sat in the ranch in George's seat in the theatre there.
Oh, nice.
And heard what he wants to hear, and I can't go to my local cinema anymore because it's just not good enough.
Right. Yeah, we get a little spoiled. I know I get spoiled going to Academy screenings. Like, that's how we saw Wicked. It was at the Academy. But during the pandemic, we all had to evaluate movie sound on our home systems. There was no screenings, and that was awful. But you can still measure it. But I like to get lost in the movie, and I want the audience to get lost in the movie. And part of that is due to really good sound.
Yeah, make the sound count. I like that. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Vickie Sampson there. Unfortunately, I had another meeting lined up, so I had to end our conversation after about an hour and 20 or whatever it was. But as you can hear, there was so much more that we could have talked about. In fact, if you want to hear the rest of the story about how the Return of the Jedi reels got stolen from Vickie's car, I found an episode of the Skywalking Through Neverland podcast from 2015 in which she goes into detail about that particular incident. I'll leave the link to that in the show notes. It's episode 72 of the Skywalking Through Neverland podcast. Coming up on the podcast, I have some great conversations lined up. One with a producer, a director, a documentarian, a VFX supervisor, so many more. I'm also maybe doing a talk in London in the summer. I'll keep you posted about that as things develop. Can't say too much at the moment, but it's exciting. I'm also lining up my next couple of articles for ILM and Skywalker Sound. You can find out about all this stuff in the Linktree link, which I'll include in the show notes as well. Oh, another piece of news. My pal Rachel Finch is going to Star Wars Celebration in Tokyo in Japan in April and is going to record some reports from the convention, which I'll be posting as little bonus episodes of this podcast. Sadly, I can't go to Japan. I have a lot of work over that period. And if you know anything about the TV and film industry at the moment, just to have work is a great thing at the moment. So I'm trying to make hay while the sun is not exactly shining, but while the sun is up. But Rachel had booked her trip there some months ago and is going to be there for the whole thing. She's going to go to some panels. She's going to be talking about just the general vibe going on there because, you know, the clash of Star Wars culture and Japanese culture is going to be quite a spectacle, I would say. So look out for those special reports from Rachel on your podcast feed. So thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries Podcast.
Freeze! Come on, get up. Go get your ride and take her back to base. Yes, sir.
We are getting way meaty.